The reason your onions may not be growing is because you're maybe not giving them the right nutrients that they need. Or maybe your onions aren't bulbing up, and that probably has more to do with the variety that you're picking or the time of year that you're growing them. So there's a lot of reasons why your onions may not either be growing, or that they are not bulbing up, or that they are not ready to harvest when you think that they should be. So I'm going to go through some of the things that I have learned about growing onions so that you can learn from my mistakes and not make those same ones. So I started most of these onions from starts, which are just small baby plants. I did start a few of them as seed. That would be like this one right here. And they're pretty small, so I definitely have more to learn when it comes to starting from seed. But the ones that I started from starts, or baby plants that I purchased, they've done a lot better. I have some about this size, and I have some that are much, much larger. So that is one indication of whether or not you're going to have a larger size bulb, is how quickly you can grow your plants. If you're starting from seed, you're really focused on getting those plants as big and bushy and healthy and growing before you get to a certain part of the year. That's one of the reasons why starting from starts, or baby plants, and then there's also sets, which are actually already formed onions, but they have not completely gotten large yet. That those generally do better just because they're further along in their maturity. Another reason why you might be struggling is you're not growing the right varieties. So I have actually 3 varieties in here. These are 2 of them. This one is a red Creole, and this one is a Texas early white. I also have one more in here, which is a Texas super sweet. Now, the variety is super important because there are actually 3 types of onions. There is short day, intermediate day, and long day onions. And all of that has to do with how much daylight hours you have during your summer solstice, which is the longest day of the year. If you live in the southern part of the United States, you are going to be growing short day onions because we have shorter days. Even our longest day of the year is nothing compared to some of our northern neighbors. If you're in kind of that middle part of the country, you're going to be growing intermediate day. And then if you're in the northern part or way up there in Alaska, you're going to be growing long day onions because during the longest day of the year, you guys have significant amounts of daylight. And onions are daylight driven, so they're told, the plant is told when to start creating the bulb once the number of daylights reaches a certain amount. So, for example, if I were to have planted these in late fall, they would never bulb because as you move from fall to winter, you actually have less daylight hours. So there's no daylight telling these plants to bulb up. So by planting them in, for us here, it's winter. So planting them right around winter and then allowing from winter to summer to slowly increase the number of daylight hours, it tells this plant to go ahead and start forming a bulb. Another reason why your plants may not be getting big or not bulbing up has to do with how much nutrition you're putting into your soil. So when I put this bed down, before I planted the starts in here, I actually put chicken manure, blood meal, bone meal, and kelp meal as amendments. I put down all those amendments, including that chicken manure fertilizer, and that did seem to help. The one thing I didn't do is about halfway through the season, I did not add or side dress more fertilizer, particularly that chicken manure. And I ended up, especially in the centers here, I ended up with these little tiny onions. And I know that this is a nutritional issue because of it. Another reason why these are so small is they actually, I'll show you above here in a second, but I actually planted these a little bit too close. So while, yes, they had plenty of room to bulb out, they didn't have plenty of room to share the nutrients that I had put in there. If I was going to be planting these as closely as I did this time next year, I definitely have to provide a lot more fertilizer. Although I think what I'm gonna, bees. I think what I'm going to do instead is actually next year I'm going to plant these further apart. I have some examples over here where they are more like 4 to 6 inches separated from each other, and that seems to be the perfect number. But these guys, I think I put them like 2 or 3 inches apart, and I did that to a lot of the ones in the center of the bed, and that's why a lot of the ones in the center of the bed are smaller. So it's a combination of distance from each other with nutrition. The closer they are together, the more they're competing for that nutrition that you're putting in. And if you fail to give them all the nutrients that they need, you will end up with smaller onions. Watering is another indicator. If you are not watering your onions on a regular basis, you're going to end up with issues. If you water too much, you can end up with different kinds of rot and fungal issues. If you water too less, then it's not going to allow the green growth to become large enough and bushy enough to be able to support the size of the bulb that you're looking for. So you really want a nice consistent watering. What I like to do during the winter when I plant these, I'm here in Florida, so your timing might be different, but here in Florida, we start our seeds in September. If you're going to grow them from seeds, if you're going to grow them from starts or baby plants, you transplant those in around November, like October, November. And then if you're going with sets, then you'll go with December, the little tiny plants. Because I transplanted them in November, I believe it was November, I water my garden twice a week during the winter, and we had a very rainy winter this year, so I actually skipped a lot of watering whenever we had rainfall. As we have moved from winter and now we are in spring / basically summer here in Florida, it is hot today, guys. I mean, we're in the 90s. I am baking out here. So as we've moved into that, I have upped my watering to 3 times a week now, and I spot water whatever looks like it's maybe struggling a bit more. So make sure that you are keeping them watered using the finger poke test, where you just stick your finger about 2 knuckles down and you come up. And this is kind of almost moderate right now, which is what I'm hoping for. I don't want it super wet right now as I harvest them, because the wetter they are, the harder it's going to be to harvest. So right now, what I would do based on my finger poke test, I had a little bit of soil still attached to my finger, which tells me that it's not completely devoid of moisture, but it's getting really close. I would definitely water this tomorrow if I were keeping these in the ground, but we're actually harvesting these today. So no worries, we're going to get them out. Now that we have grown our plants up, we have fertilized them, we've given them the water that they need, we need to know when to harvest them. Well, the best indicator of when to harvest an onion is when it looks like this. The onion top has actually fell over. It's created this fold right here that now it's cutting off the nutrition to the onion from the top. So it's not going to get any more nutrition from the green leafy growth on the top. It's only going to be getting nutrition from what's left or stored in the soil or in the bulb. So at this point, we can pull this out. And look how easy that comes out. If I were to leave these in here much longer than what I already have right now, they would start to probably rot and become less likely to store. I could totally leave these in here and let them go a whole nother year. Yes, they will live a whole nother year, because these plants are biennials, which means that they produce their bulb the first year. That's what we eat. And then the second year, if you leave it in there, it's going to produce what these bees are flying around right now, which are these flowers. I have several of them. All of my plants are first years, so you might be questioning why I am getting flowering. Well, I'm getting flowering because it's hot. Here in Florida, it is very, very, very hot, and we're having an extremely hot May. Extremely hot. I think that has caused some of them to just prematurely bolt. I can't do anything about it. What I can do is make lemonade out of lemons, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and allow these onions to stay in the ground that have the flowers, and I'm going to save the flowers for next year, because I am going to try again with seeds. One of these days I'm going to be super successful with seeds. I've had some success. I can get them to grow, I can get them up transplanted and in the ground. I just haven't gotten super large onions from growing them from seed yet, but I want to keep trying, and this is a great way for me to get some seeds. The seeds from these plants I know will be better acclimated to my environment because they have grown here. And so if I save them and I keep using them and saving them over the years, they will become more and more acclimated to Florida. And hopefully, eventually over time, I'm going to have a special variety that's all my own that does well here. So let's get the rest of these up. We're going to leave behind the ones that have flowered since you know, we want to save the seeds from those, but we are only going to leave them long enough for the seed heads to dry and turn brown, and then after that I will pull them up and we will use those onions and eat them immediately. They will not be good storage onions, but they will be perfectly fine to eat as soon as the, oh my gosh, that's a lot of bees. There's a lot going on right here. Okay, let's get these out. So we were having a lot of bee and wasp activity over there, and I was kind of getting a bit swarmed, and they were starting to sound a little bit on the angry side. So I pulled all the rest of the onions really, really quickly, and then I brought them in here so that we could sort through them. That is actually the next stage that we need to do, is to sort through the large completed onions from the ones that maybe were too small or didn't complete perfectly. And when I say they didn't complete, this is an example of one that didn't really finish bulbing, and the top never folded over, so this is not going to store well. So since it's not going to store well, my plan is to make that into onion powder, freeze-dried onions, and also frozen onions. I have plenty here I can pick from. So let's go through all these. This one didn't form its bulb correctly, so that's going to go. This one I'm kind of debating. It's small, but it has the right characteristics. It's got the bend and everything, so that's a maybe. This one is definitely a keeper. We're going to keep this for curing, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So let's go through these real quick and separate the smalls from the appropriate sized ones. All right, so I got them separated. These guys are going to go and become frozen onions, freeze-dried onions, or onion powder. These guys we're going to cure. So I need to grab some string, and I'm going to try to separate them from yellow, white, and red, because they have different shelf lives because of that. The red are going to last the longest, probably about 9 to 10 months. The yellow is going to last the shortest at about 2 months, and the white should last about 4 months. So that's why I want to keep them separate. I think this is a good bunch to start with. I took a piece of cord or rope or nylon string, I think, tied it in a knot at one end, and then I'm going to loop these around the neck. So I've looped them around, And I'm going to take this other side and I'm going to pinch it between my fingers, pull it down, and tighten it, and that's enough to hang. Okay, we now have all of them hung up. We have 6 bunches, 2 yellows, 2 whites, 2 reds. Now I'm going to wait and leave them out here hanging where they have nice good airflow. We have our fans on pretty much 24 hours a day now, and I'm going to wait for all these greens right here to turn brown. And once that's done, then I will probably braid them, I think, or there's different ways that you can hang them, but I do find that when you hang them versus when you just cut them off and put them in a bag together, they tend to last longer in storage. I figured this out when I braided my garlic last year, and it lasted forever. That air circulation just keeps allowing it to dry. So once these turn brown, I will braid each one of them and I will place them in my pantry just like I do my garlic. It's probably going to take about 2 weeks, plus or minus, depending on if we get rain and how humid it is. You can actually cure onions out in Florida. I know that there's some people that are like, no, you can't do it outside. You have to do it somewhere indoors. I've been doing it outside for years now, and I haven't had a problem. You will notice, though, that they are under cover. This is my patio. They are hanging so that they get airflow, and they are outside of the sun. They do get indirect sun, which is less than ideal, but I've never had a problem. 2 weeks out here, they'll dry up, we can braid them, and then we can bring them inside to somewhere nice and dark. The first recipe I decided to make with the smaller onions that are not going to be curing and they're not going to store very well is I'm going to make some onion powder. Specifically, I'm going to make some freeze-dried onion powder, but you can absolutely do this in a dehydrator as well. So the first part is I'm going to cut all the greens off the onions, and I'm also going to be cutting off the dried up root part. And then from there, it's really just similar to cutting onions any other time. You're going to cut the ends off. You're going to cut them in half, and you're going to peel the outer layer. Thankfully, the outer layer is really soft when they're freshly harvested, so it was really easy to peel. The downside is that fresh onions have a very potent spray. That stuff that makes your eyes water is especially bad with homegrown, freshly harvested onions. So what I do is I always do all my cutting outside on the patio. The thing that you can't see in this video, which I did not show because I just was a little embarrassed by it, is the fact that the way that I do this so that I'm not tearing up is I'm wearing my husband's swimming goggles. This actually helps me because I can get through all of my cutting without tearing up at all because his goggles connect to my face and it keeps the mist that's coming off the onions from getting in my eyes. So just a little tip, if you have to do a lot of onion processing, the way to do it is outside and wear some swim goggles. Once I've gotten all the onions chopped up and in my bowl, I'm going to go back inside and I'm going to give them a really good wash. Because throughout this process, the knife has kind of been touching some of the roots and the outside skin still has some dirt on it. So I want to get them cleaned up. So I go ahead and put them in some water and I let them soak there for just a couple minutes. And then I drain them out. While that is soaking, I'm going to go ahead and get my freeze dryer trays. If you're going to use a dehydrator, you can absolutely just do the dehydrator trays. I had some garlic that's been sitting in the freezer that I had chopped up from some of the smaller cloves that had split. Once again, these are not really going to do well curing on their own, so I'm making them into garlic powder just like I'm doing with the onions. My one recommendation if you are going to go with dehydrating is that you actually mince up your onions. Now, when you're freeze drying, you can leave them kind of chopped like this, But when you're dehydrating them, it's going to take so much longer if the onions are a larger size. So what I like to do is, if I am doing it in the dehydrator, I will chop my onions and then I will put them into a food processor or one of those mini choppers, and I will mince it down to, basically kind of a paste. I do this for both onions and garlic, and that will make them be able to dehydrate much, much faster. Since we're going to be doing freeze drying, I am going to put this into my Harvest Right freeze dryer. If you're interested in getting one of these, I'll definitely put a link down in the description. They are an investment. They are not cheap, but if you do decide that it's something that you and your family are going to want to get into, I would absolutely love it if you used my link. It does help fund some of the channel. So once I put it in my Harvest Right freeze dryer, I just close the vacuum pump thing and then I hit start, and it pretty much does all of the work by itself. It took about 30 hours total. If you're dehydrating, it's probably going to take about 24 hours, and you're going to want to keep the temperature on the dehydrator really, really low as your dehydrator will go. Somewhere between 90 and 105 would probably be the max. Now this is after it's already freeze dried and they're nice and crispy and completely dry. And so I'm going to put them in the blender. They have two options for storing your onions when you are doing freeze drying. You can store them in a Mylar bag with an oxygen absorber, but I know that this is powder that we're going to go through within a year, so I'm just going to put it in a glass jar. If you were going to go with the Mylar bag and the oxygen absorber, you probably don't want to use your hands to touch the onions because your hand does have some oil and moisture in it. Since I'm using this in a glass bottle with a vacuum seal and it's going to be consumed within a year, I'm not really worried about that much. It won't accumulate, that much moisture or anything in that short period of time that I'm going to be keeping it. But if I was going to do a Mylar bag, that onion or this onion powder would last probably about 30 years, which is pretty crazy. That's what the cool thing is about freeze drying. So then I put it in the jar, I vacuum sealed it, and that's it. It's just going to go on the pantry shelf until we need it, and anytime I need to use it, I will pop the seal, use whatever we need, and then re-vacuum seal it again. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you guys had fun harvesting onions with me. Happy gardening, guys.